This is On the Flywheel, a podcast where each week we talk to entrepreneurs and professionals about the practical things they do to build and keep momentum in their personal and professional lives. Hello and welcome to On the Flywheel. My name is Jonathan Mart of Flywheel Consulting. I'm very excited to have on the podcast today Jeff Arnold of the Armstrong Company. He does corporate sales there, and I'm excited to chat with him and get to know him a little bit better and see what makes him successful. So welcome, sir.
Thank you for having me, Jonathan. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. So the way I always like to start is to give people have you give people a little bit of your background and kind of how you got to where you are today from kind of a professional and personal level.
Sure. So out of high school, I went to work, just retail, went to work at RadioShack in the mall.
Okay.
And it was one of those, it's like, I need a job. I'm going to put on a nice shirt and bring a resume and let's just go door to door in the mall. There's 30 retailers here. How can you go wrong? And they signed me up. It turned out to be a commissionable sales position. I was selling contracts for cell phones that required doing some, like actually pulling credit checks. And so you're asking for some in-depth information from people that just happen to walk in. And I was able to be pretty successful there. I actually made good money on commissions for the time, right? Being 19 and fresh out of high school. I was on that track for a couple of years where it's like, okay, now we want to make you an assistant manager. And I'm watching what my manager does. I'm like, you work 50% more hours than me and you're getting paid less than me as a salesperson. Like, my job is cushy in comparison. So given that there wasn't really a sales track to make it a career unless you're like top 5 in the company, which is a huge grind. And even then there's a lot better paying work out there. And then the management track was just like, okay, you're going to sacrifice for 5 to 10 years to hopefully get on a
like classic
ladder.
Kind of corporate America, just grind
and
the corporate
to be
ladder.
fair, it was still a great job, but I didn't see a trajectory there. So I decided, well, I will go to college. how about that? Yeah. So I went to UC Santa Cruz as a freshman because I had just taken that gap, and it ended up being a really good experience in terms of getting what I will call like a framework or a toolkit. I was an economics major. At the end of it, I did some other stuff first, but I changed to become an economics major. And since then, it's been a really helpful lens when I'm, dealing with something at work, when I'm trying to figure out an interpersonal interaction, when I'm trying to look at, okay, where should I be thinking about for the next few years in terms of what the political environment is, or what the likelihood is of an industry going one way or the other. It's not a certain thing, but it's a helpful way of looking at what are the incentives in play in a quantitative way, and what are the interests from there. So, and what are the tools available? And that is a much different picture than arguing about any particular term, any specific policy. And it translates also into an opportunity for business success. I come in, I'm very much a big picture thinker. The downside is that's often not the role. And if you're an independent contributor, it's like, that's great that you get the big picture, but that's
I need you to just like have the tactical nuts and bolts here.
Yeah, so came out of college, went into another commission sales role, selling cables and cable assemblies, high-speed data cables into data centers and stuff. So again, kind of in a tech space, there is a theme there. I grew up, coding my own websites in HTML off of Microsoft Word, saved to HTML, then take it into Notepad and
wow,
use Paintbrush, all the classics, man, all the hits. And so I had kind of a context for tech and did that job for a couple of years. Ended up feeling like I had a stress-related health condition. I mean, not just feeling it, realized I had it, backed off and was like, I don't know if I can work in an office or for a person. What am I going to do? I got to figure out consulting, be a 1099. And so, I worked on some startups with friends. They didn't work out, but they were really good learning experiences. Ultimately, it's one of those where in retrospect, the amount of money that was not exactly wasted, but put into an effort that didn't come to fruition was so much less money than I would have easily sent after a losing proposition in the future. Like, orders of magnitude worse potential for loss in the future.
Yeah.
For having been burned in the past, so to speak, on a smaller transaction, or not even transaction, but, just endeavors with friends. And it helps to temper expectations and help temper that naivety right?
Yeah.
So those were kind of like the very broad category, you know, all these different individual consulting things. I landed at a marketing agency doing research. They, you know, do their big account was very in medical, right? So relatively high in research, and you know, these are like cancer treating equipment, targeted 3D radiation, stuff like that. And I did well there. You know, I could talk the talk when we were getting into technical details. So they brought me on to start doing interviews for other websites they were developing and doing copy points and then doing copywriting. And they had a partner agency that did their web design and development. I ended up moving over there, and that was where I had my highest title to that point was head of client services.
Okay.
And so it was very broad. I got to big picture with the owners, really small group. You know, it's like 5 of us ultimately on the team, but it was at a much higher level in a smaller group. So I realized, okay, I'm actually competent at this level, right? I didn't have a clear picture of that before, as I'd always been an independent contributor. And I did that for a couple more years. It ended up where I went back to consulting for a little while. That was really where the main like startup stuff was happening, and it was around marketing and web development, and and then into the cannabis space.
Okay.
In varied forms.
Did you get into it at the right time or the wrong time?
You know, I got into it at an okay time. Is what it was.
Yes.
I was in one of the plateaus on the way down.
Okay. Okay.
I got to throw it in every time I talk about cannabis now and economics. The price of milk. How long has it taken to double in price? A few years, right? Gallon of milk, 5-10 years.
Well,
something like that.
Yeah. Well, and it actually fluctuates a lot because it's a commodity. So it
sure, but I mean overall, the price with inflation, it's pretty significantly higher in a few years, right? Price of cannabis has come down in half at the same time. Like the top shelf price is half of what it was in nominal dollars.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean that's what happens when you legalize something and you make it a commodity. Is that the big boys get into it and they make it just a machine, you know, in a factory. And
crucially, it's a cottage industry with decades of history of having to overcome prohibition. Cannabis is still, as far as I recall, the #1 agricultural export from California, and it is illegal to export.
Is it? It's really based on dollars or based on volume?
Ooh, good question. I don't know the answer to that actually, because that would be a very critical metric.
Yes, because there's
a much higher risk premium.
Yeah, because I could see possibly by dollars, because you're selling. Well, not a weed user, so I'm not a very expert. I don't really know, but
it's by a weed user tells
exactly
me that, so
okay.
yes.
Yeah, there we go. Exactly. So I'm pretty square that way. I'll take that L. But
no, not an L at all. You're saving money. That's a win, man. No, there's nothing wrong with that. If you're not missing it, you're not missing out. Like,
no, yeah,
there's no downside there.
Yeah. So, but they sell it by the is it ounce or grams or
okay, back in high school. It was by the gram.
Okay.
It was even by the nickel sack, which is like half a gram. We were struggling. You know, that was a struggle. $20 a gram when I was in high school was 20 years ago. $20. $2,002.
Yeah.
Maybe that's too revealing.
No, we're old now, you know.
And now you can go buy a gram at the store. It's like $5.
Wow.
$6.
Yeah.
You can buy. I'm sorry. I know I'm going down a rabbit hole.
No. I think this is an interesting. It's an interesting discussion from both an economics and just general business perspective.
And it's not a fad like it's going away either. It's a pretty unique economic example. You can equate it kind of to wine. You can equate it kind of to microbreweries. They're relatively similar because there is a hype element to it where it booms in popularity when it became legal, and suddenly everyone's realizing, like, I can actually walk into a retail establishment, have a conversation.
Well, I think at least I assume for you as well, this is a very California-based perspective, because I don't know, I'm sure other parts of the country it's different. But
the legal realities are different too. Yeah. I'm not risking what someone in other states are potentially risking just by participating in what here is a legal market.
Right, but I think the popularity in it has, to me, just anecdotally, like hearing people talk about it, has soared dramatically, and yet the price has gone down, because everyone does it now. At least to some level recreation. Not everyone. A lot of people do it just casually
Especially
now.
if you count people who are using CBD without a lot of THC.
Oh, yeah. That's
sort of cohort as well.
Well, the whole, gummies and helping you to sleep and all that kind of stuff now has become so popular because it's so accessible because of the legalization. So
yeah, it's really true. It changed in a pretty dramatic way.
Yeah. So I think so you got into the space and you guys were trying to market it. You guys were trying to
Well, this was consulting. So ultimately we were, and again, I say we, and this was like 3 or 4 different endeavors with different unrelated people for the most part on different projects. So one was extraction based and like looking to have a setup to create concentrates basically, which is taking the active ingredients of cannabis and separating it from the plant material. Teaching other people how to do that was part of that consulting. Manufacturers that wanted a different technique or that were looking to refine their product, we do a degree of manufacturing, testing, and process revision, writing standard operating procedures, stuff that it does not sound like cannabis.
Right.
Right. So technically, it's like manufacturing consulting. Agricultural consulting, because go in and help people understand like you're wasting a lot of money on a lot of different pesticides and or different like interventions, and a lot of labor associated with that, and the result could be better just by starting with better inputs.
Yeah,
take more labor up front, more investment up front, but overall total picture, less spend, better result.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is because I've heard many stories about people trying to, marijuana is legalized. Everyone sees how much money people, make, and then they're going to get into it and try and start a business. It's like, but it's a lot of people like, oh, I like weed, or I know a lot about weed, so then I'm going to start a business or get involved in it. And people wasted so much money because they don't understand. As someone who's from agriculture, you don't understand. And the amount of, these are people with no real business experience and no real agricultural experience, and you're going in and trying to then compete, in an area that now became a commodity. Yeah. And people do not understand how difficult commodity agriculture is.
You can love food, start a restaurant, have no clue what you're doing.
Exactly.
You can love beer, start a brewery, have no idea what you're doing.
Perfect analogies, because there's people also do both of those things, which is insane because they're both very difficult business. You can't you have to run a business, and you have to know how to make a good product and do it for cost effectively.
Now, what is relatively unique about cannabis in this way is that because, again, so when I say cottage industry, like everyone and their uncle's been making it, they're buy it from your cousin, your neighbor, whoever, because it's easy to do in your backyard. There's no barrier to entry other than the legality.
Well, and when you're paying so much for it, you can be really inefficient at making it and still make a lot of money.
Yeah. I mean, even with the price coming down, it's still, like a lot of people just want it for their own consumption. And
right.
It's very casual that way. But in terms of the license, the retail industry, when that came to town, and we saw a huge influx of out-of-state cash in a way that we didn't when it was strictly medical. Mm-hmm. When it opened up, and people are saying, well, hey, there's a bunch of latent demand here. There's a much wider market here. Why wouldn't we tap that super hard? You have folks coming in who are not really familiar with cannabis in terms of growing it necessarily, or how it can be used in different ways, because it's a very diverse plant. And so kind of corporate money is just a very broad way of putting it, right? And then you have this cottage industry that's for decades been working very hard to not have to deal with any kind of legitimate business transaction. And now they're co-owners.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's a super unique situation as well. You're not used to having to answer to anyone, used to doing everything under the table because you had to, right? It's not just, hey, I'm going to go do your landscaping and we're going to do it cash under the table. It's now in order to stay in business, I have to do this. And to survive, I have to do everything under the table.
I've never heard about the federal government going after interstate landscapers.
Yeah, exactly. So it's, that's such an interesting thing. I assume it's settling out now, but it's not something that I
those
stay
who've
on
been
top of.
Doing it reliably are able to stabilize. a bunch of people who are what I would say leaned one way or the other. A lot of corporate money fizzled out because they invested in huge operations that the profit margins changed and they were underwater.
Mm-hmm.
And so they either put in more money chasing the loss, trying to capture market share, or they left. And then you have, I'll call the OGs, right, who are, really just trying to do whatever they can to be able to participate to the degree they can. They closed shop, but really went to the traditional market for the most part.
Okay, interesting.
And so, inside the industry, the wink, wink, nod, nod is a lot of places do more business out the back door than they do on record.
Interesting.
And the rationale for that is very understandable. There is a huge premium out of state, and that's ultimately where a lot of product will go.
We're talking about basic supply and demand economics.
It's arbitrage for a lot of these people because they already have the network, right? And so it's like, I get it in this state, put it in that state, it's worth twice as much. Like,
of course. When those are the when you're incentivizing people to do that, it's going to happen.
Of course, then when you pass through a state that has different laws, like that suddenly is a whole different picture, and it's no longer smiles, handshakes, and having a good time.
Right. Well, and I think that's too. Then there becomes a relationship, the risk versus reward, discussion, and probably the riskier it is, the higher the reward is. But at what point, do you keep playing?
And there's not much of a risk premium in California as part of that too.
Right.
And we've made it that way. Honestly, that's a really good thing.
Yeah.
That risk premium is not going to everyday folk.
Yeah.
It's going to people who can be really organized about what they do.
Yeah. It's a very interesting thing to see, but you keep seeing more and more states hop on board, so I wouldn't be surprised if eventually it's legal and federally.
I wish I could pull the reference, but there was a study that came out recently that there's now more people using cannabis habitually than using alcohol habitually in the United States.
Really?
Which to my mind is a net benefit.
Yeah, that's wow. I guess it depends what habitually means, right?
Yeah, I'm sure it's a pretty broad, but just in the sense of regular use, and maybe I would assume it's counting casual use. It's a lot less consequential in terms of potential damage to society, potential damage to oneself. We're finding there's even more actual systemic consequence to casual alcohol use, which is kind of mind-blowing to me because it never really seemed like casual use was a big problem at small degrees and recommended or whatever. I digress though.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, well that was a great digression. Very interesting. So how do we make the final jump to the Armstrong Company?
So I did a bunch of consulting, and it fizzled out. I worked with business partners where I invested a lot, kind of on spec, and that wasn't the right call to do. We needed to be building more gradually. We parted ways, and I went back and realized, okay, I've actually got my symptoms managed enough. I discovered CBD was really helpful, and I hadn't used that as part of my regimen up to that point before.
Just as a way of managing stress?
As a way, I know we're going down the rabbit hole. I'll keep it super short. CBD does almost nothing in isolation. If there's even trace THC, it can be very, very helpful and activates. They both bind to the same point on two different again, they need one another to really function the best way. THC in isolation, they did studies on it for AIDS patients and patients who were dying of cancer back in the 80s and 90s. It was called Marinol. It was synthesized THC. They did not have a good reaction. They felt paranoid. They basically felt all the uncomfortable parts.
And none of the good parts.
And it really didn't allow for that. And so it's not just the chemical. It's what's called an entourage effect of multiple different chemicals in the plant.
Interesting.
Multiple cannabinoids, multiple terpenes, which are flavor, smell, but also psychoactive potentially, because linalool's from lavender. It's kind of a sedative. There's other ones that are from, there's limonene, which is more of a stimulant. And that's sort of where you start, sativa, indica, much larger
Start nerding out on all the details.
It could go much deeper. The short version is I found CBD super helpful, and it was not part of my regimen at all up to that point, despite using cannabis extensively. and I realized, I could function at a job. Yeah. So let's do this. I was married or was getting married, and realized that it would be nice to be putting more
have
in
a
more reliably.
stable income.
Yeah, to be able to plan for the future. Wanting to buy a house, wanting to start a family.
I mean, you're talking about the benefits of of like why getting a job is great is because you can count on those things.
Yeah. So I went from waking up at 8:30 or 9 in the morning and whatever to I started on a cybersecurity certificate at Empire College. I started selling Ford in Petaluma, both at the same time, up at 6, do the whole double thing, 10, 12-hour days. And it was great. It was great, like, wake up, I haven't done this in a long time, but I'm capable of it. Remind myself that I'm capable of, like, sticking to a regimen and actually keeping along with it. And I was just getting to that point where, like, I sold a few cars. I've, like, gotten a big picture about where I could fit in. If I wanted to do red team work eventually, there's a path there in cybersecurity, right? Doing the penetration testing and fun stuff.
Okay.
And while I was there, a friend who I'd worked with at the web development company back in the day called me up and said, "Hey, I'm director sales at this cannabis company, or director marketing at this cannabis company. We need someone to do sales. Are you free?" Dragged me back in, and I worked for them for a couple years. They were actually really, really old club in Berkeley, and they had their own distribution center, which was, again, one of the oldest distros in California, and their own farm. So between those things, it was completely vertically integrated. I got to play a lot at each stage. I had consulting knowledge for each stage. It was the owner directly who brought me on. So again, I'm having that like high level kind of conversations. I brought in a brand collaboration with an extractor to do like co-branded products. So I have these things that if I remove the word cannabis, suddenly they look good on a resume.
Oh, interesting. So I'm curious, what do you put on your resume for that kind of stuff? I got to check out your LinkedIn and see what it says.
So supply chain, because I brought in, like 100 pounds of smalls for them to process when they were out of material. Right? Yeah. Best sale I ever made was to my own company from a third party I knew. So supply chain, I'm having to manage sales, distribution, and product development with this collaboration, brand development, all these things. A bunch of that's in line with the marketing company, a bunch of that's in line with the cable manufacturer. So I'm able to kind of draw a narrative out, like extract a narrative.
Are you when you're in an interview, are you directly referencing like your cannabis experience, or are you kind of dancing around it?
For this job, yes.
Okay.
For this job, I straight up, yes. The circumstances might be their own podcast, but the shortest version is that I was directly referred by my mentor at the old company to the president of the local branch of this company, 1-to-1. Mm-hmm. And so, I'm talking to him the Monday morning after I'd been let go the Thursday before, right? And same industry, analogous role, and we're just really straight talking with each other, like, what can you do? Where would this fit? What's your history? And like, I came out of the cannabis industry before this, and he said, like, oh yeah, my son grows great weed.
Okay. So he was.
I'll put it like this.
Able to relate.
So, you get drug tested before virtually any job, even here in California. And he tells me, now, be sure to tell them no THC. Tell them you're not a driver. Give them the no THC test. I'm glad that you're as concerned about this as I am. That's very reassuring.
Yeah, because you, as someone who has experience managing and hiring commercial drivers, even if you smoked, like sometimes you smoke 2 weeks ago and you just like that one time you're hanging out with some friends and you do it once and you're not, and you drive days later, it sticks in your system. So it's a big deal.
It's detectable in your system for a very long time. It's not still affecting you.
Correct. That's an important distinction.
I mean, it can be detectable 30 days plus.
Yeah.
This is something that is, it binds in our lipid system. We have endocannabinoids in our body already, right? So it building up allows it to be tested for a very long period of time. And so it depends on use, it depends on frequency and all that kind of stuff. But it is true. People have failed drug tests from like, I took a hit of a joint a week ago.
Yeah. I mean, we've had that, my family's business, we had a couple issues here and there with people's, and like, I barely did anything. And I wasn't high while driving, which, we didn't have no reason
and
to
now
suspect.
it's legal. You know, and so what are we going to tell people? You can't go home on the weekend and relax.
Well, yeah.
But
If you're a commercial driver, you can't
You
because.
truly can't.
But even commercial drivers, like it's so strict. Like you really basically can't even get a ticket. Like you have, there's a little bit of leeway there, but if you're a commercial driver, you can't mess around with that stuff.
In your everyday car, you mean?
In your everyday car,
totally.
yeah, you can't, and even if you still technically have your license, it becomes difficult to insure you, and if you get a couple points,
attractive to whoever would be
well,
dispatching.
or exactly, or the company is like, well, I can't, my insurance company won't insure you.
Yeah,
like you go through the process. It's like drug testing, and then send their, you pull their DOT records, and then you send them to insurance and say, hey, you want to insure this person? Like, similar. If you're a young driver, if you're 20 years old and you just got your commercial license, you're pretty much, like, at least with larger companies, you're pretty much not going to drive commercially because you're basically uninsurable. Because you're a young kid driving a big heavy truck, and you can, you're just more likely to do dumb stuff.
That's a lot of tonnage.
Yeah. So I anyway, that was a digression. So
no, not at all. I think that it's relevant. We're talking about the state of drugs that are of varying legality in various states, and we have programs that are in total conflict with one another in that way.
Yeah.
So okay. Sorry. Last example.
Okay, let's go.
In the intelligence community, they're regular having to recruit high level for cybersecurity, both directions. Right.
Mm-hmm.
They had such a small pool eventually that actually came out and said in their recruiting, we're no longer drug testing.
I totally believe that. Yeah. And I mean, a certain degree, especially for like marijuana use, it's you're gonna kind of like, you can just judge it by it. It's typically not so devastating to someone's lifestyle that it's going to ruin their lives, right? Not that it has never ruined a person's life, I'm sure.
Oh, I'm sure.
But also, like, if you're hiring someone they're not just immediately, it's going to ruin their lives and just going to immediately be a bad employee, at that point you can just say, okay, we either see the quality of your work or not, and just judge it based on the work, and that has no bearing. Just like you don't, like, basically, maybe if someone's an alcoholic, you're not going to hire them, but if they drink beer, like, recreationally, are you going to be worried about it?
How do you find out they're an alcoholic?
Well, yes,
right?
That's the other thing. I mean, you are not legally allowed to really ask those kinds of questions, right? But if you're somehow aware of it,
right.
So.
Well, and I think that you make a good point in terms of how consequential these things are. Keeping it really short, cigarettes are fully legal. They're way more consequential to individual health. Alcohol, fully legal, way more consequential to the rate of accidents, the rate of domestic abuse, a lot of other associated problems, right?
Do you think, though, that's because of since we're in it, do you think that that's because I feel like a lot more, I know you said earlier that across the whole United States habitual use, but I feel like people drinking alcohol is way more common, and so are those statistics like accounted, like those differences accounted for in terms of? I
don't want to defend the study. This
okay.
is like going on and on.
Okay, I know. I'm just curious.
So,
yeah.
But I will say that anecdotally, certainly too, there's a lot more cannabis use among people that 5-10 years ago, like, it's legal now. I don't know. And so the stigma's pretty much gone in California, pretty close to gone.
Oh, yeah. I was more just referring to the fact in terms of the impact on people's lives and stuff like that. Just because the sample size is so much different and stuff.
It can be developmentally. It can be in terms of dysfunction, basic dysfunction, right? And so that is a problem. We don't want a dysfunctional society. We don't want people to not be productive or contribute to society.
Right.
That's important, 100%. So there's arguments about, okay, what does responsible use look like? We haven't really had that conversation around cannabis that much.
No, that's fair. That's fair. 100%. So, let's get in. So you're because there's been a great conversation, so I'm not complaining.
But we should get to the moving industry eventually, right?
Well, so you end up at the Armstrong Company doing basically selling jobs, right? And you guys, I'll let you explain it. Let's talk about real quickly what you're doing for them now.
Sure. The shortest version also is that I wanted my wife to be able to quit her job, so I went to a full-time W-2. This was during the pandemic, and it was the best job market I'd ever experienced, so I took my time, got a sales position that had good pay. that was a different mover, and I was doing just commercial moves. So I was moving offices and, to a degree, data centers.
Okay.
Right? And it was a great crash course. I got good pay. I signed the contract. My wife quit her job so she could stay home with our baby. Right. So that was why things took such a fast, hard turn in a different direction from like doing cannabis sales, marketing, and brand stuff, which was fun, but was not a consistent enough income to where
kids change things, man.
Oh gosh, what?
That's a whole nother rabbit hole, right?
Again,
grossly change your priorities and your perspectives. Yeah.
That'll be its own episode or two. And so I was totally outside the industry. I had no experience in moving or facilities or the areas that are generally associated, logistics, trucking. I had no experience in that stuff. And probably 3 months to really get up to speed on the product, 6 months to feel like I could talk about it reasonably. And then by 18 months, I could see a trajectory, and I was fired. So again, came over to Armstrong, and it ended up being a better fit. It was one where instead of just selling commercial moves, they were fully integrated to residential, logistics, all these other things, which the previous company did, but under like 6 or 7 different individual companies. So there was no collaboration. It was entirely a handoff. It was completely siloed, very intentionally. Here it's like, okay, what's your customer want? Okay, we'll teach you how to do. Okay, we'll give you all support around that. Perfect.
Yeah.
So there's nothing I can't.
It's so interesting. When I met you, I never heard of. My perspective on moving companies, it was either you're getting a U-Haul and doing it yourself, or you like have some guys throw some stuff in a van and then drive it somewhere.
Yep.
And so the comprehensive nature of what you guys do was kind of new for me to hear about.
So, and again, this is because like I've told you offline before, is we're the biggest mover there is, and so we are this very big umbrella of services, and then it's like, well, okay, what within there is actually relevant? So in terms of picking up a U-Haul or doing a pod, there's going to be cost savings there because you're doing the labor.
Sure.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
Or if you're using 2 guys in a truck, equivalent locally, which there are totally good services. I work with some of them or refer business to some of them, because if they're right here in town and they're not having a dispatch from far away and they're literally just moving a storage unit, of course I'm going to connect them with someone like that who can do it super quick and easy if there's nothing delicate, whatever. But then when you are moving across the country, or you're moving your mom's house and there's a lot of stuff to go through and it's delicate, right? Those are the situations where it kind of goes beyond the general level of service that is reasonable to expect from a company that size.
Right.
Right? Because if it's 2 guys in a truck, they're going to be trained to doing what 2 guys
throwing
in a truck
couches
do.
and boxes in a truck.
And they can be super nice about that too. They can be, there can be good customer service. There can be really friendly folks, and they do their best to take care, and that's all fine. It's just not the same service. So where I am, my services are relevant when anything gets complex, when anything gets to the point where it's like you just need to not have to worry about it.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not because things aren't going to go wrong. Things can totally go wrong. It's whose responsibility do you want it to be when something goes wrong?
Right.
Because, over time that stuff happens. So a recent example, and this is BNI, right? I don't know. I assume you talk about it.
I've mentioned BNI before, yeah, for sure.
Business referral group, right?
Right.
And just joined, and the first referral I got that I closed was they were going to do a U-Haul. They had a pod. They had a local moving crew that was going to load the pod. They had a transit company that was going to ship the pod. They had an unload crew that was going to do that. Those were all different companies. They were orchestrated by U-Haul, but they were all different companies that you have to contract with. And, I talked them through what the alternative was. Like, if I do it, I'm responsible for every step, door to door, packing, disassembling, delivering, unloading, replacing, reassembling. And it's going to cost you more. It'll cost you about $1,000 more, a little less. Great.
I mean, if I'm doing a substantial move, $1,000 does not seems absolutely worth it,
And those are the kind of trade-offs. And the example I like to give in work, and this is also something I do on the commercial side, because there, when you're exiting a space, the requirements can be a lot more extensive.
Sure.
It's like, we rented it to you with white walls. All right, back to that state. Is that what we want it now? Wow. And so I can bring in other trades. And the story I love to give, or the analogy I like to give, is imagine that you have your plumber your painter, your drywaller, and there's a delay with one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the other one was scheduled to come in right behind them. Okay, now they're delayed. Well, their schedule isn't freed up until 2 weeks later.
Yeah. And then...
And all those downstream effects. And sometimes there's money involved with that. Sometimes there's delays of things that completely shift, what the plan was to get out. It can affect employees, and those costs get really serious. So the idea is that if it's my team responsible for that, I literally have to replace someone if it comes down to it, because I've guaranteed the delivery,
Mm-hmm.
right? So for a homeowner, what that means is one point of contact to deal with. It's usually more customer service related at that point. But then there's an insurance element for residential as well, which is this is going 1,000, 2,000 miles in a truck over roads with bumps.
Things happen.
And so having a greater sense of like, okay, truly, I've seen stories where a driver didn't pick up something, or something was damaged along the way. And drivers are an independent resource, because we're not dispatching and getting back. We're looking for, okay, who is willing to go from here to here?
Right.
And, as I'm sure you deal with, right?
Yeah.
And so when something happens there, we have control because
try shipping eggs across the country. Happens all the time.
I mean, you're in refrigerated trucks, I assume.
Yes,
too,
refrigerated eggs. Yeah, so that's also an issue. Yeah. It got crazy during COVID how expensive refrigerated trucks were. It was insane how expensive that stuff was. And we also get not eggs but other things from overseas. The cost of shipping containers was insane. From like, it being like a couple $1,000s to ship a container to being $20,000 to ship a container.
Wow.
That's how crazy it got during COVID. So
so I wasn't there for that part of it.
Yeah. You would have. Yeah, you probably would have had some interesting stories if you had been doing that stuff during
most
COVID.
Of it would be people being sad because I couldn't deliver, probably, right? I mean, during that supply chain.
Yeah, there was definitely a lot of juggling around and dealing with logistics, and because there were shortages and there was such huge demand because everyone's sitting at home buying stuff and things and trying to get anyway.
Well, the trucks are an independent market, though, is like the takeaway here, right?
Oh yeah.
And so there's all these unknowns for that middle portion of it,
right?
And so something happened, and it wasn't.
And truck drivers lie all the time. I could talk all day long about it. Well, okay, just
we have mechanisms in place. Part of that umbrella is that like everyone is in the same system for communication and verification, and if there's a problem, like everyone knows about it.
Yeah,
right
we when I first started working with like long haul truck drivers, I used to care a lot about like. About how not that I was want to be mean or anything, but I used to care a lot about how they reacted to things, or about being really concerned about the things they told me, and then I realized that everything they say is a lie.
No.
and to just you just got to be like, well, it just is what it is. Like, sorry, I can't help you. Like, that is what it is, because they just lie through their teeth about things all the time. They're saying, oh, I'm right down the road, and they're 5 hours away still, and just like, or they, so many things we say, hey, you need to do this before you come here, and then they show up with fake documents and stuff like that, and just like crazy stuff constantly.
That sounds like it may be a vary by industry thing, because I haven't encountered that.
Well, I don't know who you guys are contracting with and how the brokers you're using.
We're air-ride trucks. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of a different category, I think.
Well, I would say most long haul refrigerated trailers are on airbags.
Refrigerators.
Yeah, they're going to have airbag trailers and stuff. It's just mostly like for. Anyway, it's a whole thing, but it's very mixed in terms of there's some great drivers, and then there's a lot of ones that just kind of do whatever they need to do, and it's just kind of a weird because they're all independent contractors. There's not a lot of accountability. Basically,
that's what I was going to say. It sounds like what's different, because our drivers all have to be participating in this program. They're independent, but they're all under a pretty tight.
Yeah. So, and I assume it's probably you're getting fed pretty consistent work at a reasonable rate, and so you don't want to. Like, you want to play the game to stick with it. So,
and I mean, these guys, a single household probably takes up a fifth of the truck. So they're doing 5 pickups, 5 drop-offs. They have to have customer service.
Yeah,
they're going to be dealing.
So I think it's really attracting a different crowd for sure.
If you're dealing with homeowners versus if you're dealing with businesses, right? Just right off the bat, you got 2 different categories.
Yeah, and we're doing single. one big. You drive to a place, they load your whole truck up, and you come and you drop a whole truck. It's just like a little. It's much different. So,
but end result is I've seen things where something gets broken, something gets lost, and that meant we had to pay out of pocket for additional storage, trips to site, however many it took. Oh, we got there and the thing wasn't actually ready. Damn, that sucks. We're going to have to eat that cost.
Yeah.
This is what we signed up for.
Yeah. No, that's an interesting service. What I want to get, because we're actually kind of almost running out of time here, and I'm enjoying the conversation, but I don't want to take up too much of your time. I want to talk about the fact that you've kept coming back to sales over all the years, and talk to me a little bit about why you keep coming back to sales.
It's the most consistent through line, I would say, of my work history as a starting point. Given that the motivation was to get a job at as high a level of pay as I could, the commission part of it made that hard, and so I was looking for things that had high salary. But ultimately, the fit I found was in a sales position that had that salary, which is relatively uncommon. And it was trading into an industry that I was unfamiliar with, but that I was supported in networking around and supported in education around. I had a great boss at first at that company. And so that just took me on a whole professional track that was really different. I was suddenly involved with my local chambers of commerce and local politics, not in an advocacy way, but in terms of interacting with them directly, kind of back channel, understanding what some of the problems were. I started, I'm volunteering to run our Petaluma City Hall Election Center again. I've done that for the last couple of years now. And that all came about from looking for that work. So the sales component of it is where I see the long term of it, because you're building up a book of business and you're setting it up to grow over time. That's really attractive to me, is growing something over time. It's relationship based, so that is already kind of cathartic to me of having those kind of interactions. I just enjoy it. And the negotiation component is also satisfying, because it's taking a puzzle and figuring out how do we make this fit ultimately. So those components of it end up lending themselves to technical sales that end up lending themselves to relatively large dollar amounts sales. There's much bigger ones, but for me. And how do I want to put it? It's I could imagine myself doing plenty of other things, but having this consulting background, doing business consulting, it's just so obvious. If you own a business, you're a salesperson. So if you want to be successful, kind of whatever you do, you have to at least have the mentality of, I'm selling you on wanting to work with me.
Right.
I'm selling you on wanting to interact with me at all.
Yeah. No, I mean, well, there's and I think this is true with the common thing about everyone's a salesperson in some degree, because
you're in business, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but even if you're just trying to get a job, right?
Or dating.
Yes, it's true. I mean, you're trying to you're trying to sell yourself to your boss, sell yourself to a potential partner. I mean, even this is the more cynical side of things, but even churches are trying to sell themselves to people to come visit their church, right?
That's an interesting one.
So I could talk. That's a whole other. We're just stacking up some episodes for the future here.
I like it.
But the point is that everyone is selling. But I do think that is, and so being successful at selling, I think you can translate that to success in a lot of different ways. But I think it is different. Not everyone is cut out to be a professional salesperson, because it is. Depending on what kind of salesperson you are, if you're out you're going out and having to create something from nothing, and you're not just being fed leads, that's a difficult thing. Not a lot of people can't handle the ambiguity of that.
It can be scary. It can just be straight up scary while you don't necessarily know. So when I say 18 months I saw the trajectory, that's a pretty standard schedule for me. About 6 months I start being confident in the product. About 18 months I start being confident in the trajectory. So I think that with sales, it is always going to be a time investment, and that's tough. It's kind of if you're going to start a company, you should already have a backstop. You should already have a cash backstop.
Yeah.
And so if you're doing a sales position, you kind of have to expect there to be a ramp up where you need a cash backstop, and that's not a normal job position.
No, it's not.
For. So I think for people that want to do professional sales and be successful at it, I would say be prepared for it to be I don't want to use the word grind, because if people feel like they're really grinding in sales, they can be very successful and they'll probably get burnt out on it. But if they're approaching it, how do I want to put it? in a way that's compatible with their personality, where they can enjoy some aspect of it, then the financial rewards are obviously the goal. But if you're able to do it in a way that feels compatible with your nature, like I'm out networking and talking to people and building relationships because that's allowed in my role, I'm really happy doing it.
Sure.
So it's going to be a balance for anyone. If you're going into sales and you don't like sales, you can anticipate having a bad time.
Well, I have a friend literally had this conversation Saturday. Yeah, Saturday. And he's had a sales job basically his entire career, and he sticks with it because the money is good, but he's kind of miserable most of the time.
Oh, no.
And I'm like, but he's also feels kind of stuck because now that's his entire experience, that's his entire in kind of a manufacturing industry. So
he's got a book of business.
He has a book of business.
And
yes.
So he can either take it with him or he can walk away from it.
Yes.
And either one of those is kind of scary.
Yeah, and the thing is that he just doesn't like selling. He's kind of an introvert a little bit. Like, it doesn't enjoy the relationship side of it, which I think is, like, to be a good salesperson, enjoy selling. You have to, even if you're an introvert a little bit, but you have to enjoy the relationship aspect of it, and just like the putting yourself out there and meeting people aspect of it. And he doesn't really like any of that. And I'm like, dude, you got to start working on something else on the side, because it's not worth it for money for your entire life to be doing something you're not actually really enjoying.
At the very least, it's going to be really hard to find success ultimately that way, right? Because if you are in that place where you're unhappy with what you're doing, you might get a good financial compensation, but at least let that be like a jumping off point to do something that you actually want to be doing long term.
Yeah, but the thing is, you just get it. And I think this is another a quick digression, but I do think it's also like, it's easy to get sucked into something that you don't like because of money, and that's the danger of a traditional job. Mm-hmm. Right? Is the steady income, is the reliable, especially when you're getting a high paycheck, reliable high paycheck, is its own addiction. You know what I'm saying? And which for some people, like going off and starting your own business, or it's not the right fit, right? Mm-hmm. But alternatively, I think people also get stuck because of it and are afraid to try other things, because then you talking about perspective change. You get married, you have a kid, and then you have bills pile up, your lifestyle increases with your income. You get more and more entrenched, and it becomes harder and harder to like break free from the paycheck.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally fair, and that's leverage.
Yeah.
Companies use that as leverage.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's always a dance. So, Jeff, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I want to get into a couple of the bonus questions here, because those ones are always fun. So the first one is, I like to ask people, what are some of the books that you've either recommended the most or gifted the most to people?
Gosh, I should be gifting more books probably. And we talked about this before we started the interview. I had to like kind of rack my mind, because I do a lot of news reading, I do a lot of paper reading, I do like a lot of short form content reading. So this
is a judgment-free podcast. If you're not a heavy book reader, that's okay.
I would say, and that this is a heavy book, but it's a very educational book, and I think is relevant to the moment and is pretty timeless in terms of its relevance. And that is Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow. Again, this is a topic we haven't delved into in the interview today, and it is heavy, but the shortest version of it is that the terms have changed and the rationale has changed over time, but the stats have not changed dramatically over time. And if we start looking at what that means in and of itself before we start talking about the whys or any of the specifics, you kind of have a clearer picture of where we exist as a society today and why.
Yeah. No, I definitely dug into a lot of that stuff. This is not a political podcast, but I'll just leave this. I'll just leave this little thing. I think it's really, as someone who, I dug into a lot of that stuff, when the Black Lives Matter movement was happening and all during COVID and all this crazy stuff.
And this was written before that even.
Yeah. So this is a long, I was first exposed, as someone who grew up in Petaluma, a white, straight male in a predominantly white town. My perspective on things was very narrow, and I don't think that I was necessarily that I've ever mistreated anyone or anything like that, as far as I know. But it was just like I had a very narrow perspective, and then I got exposed to college. That was something that college was great for me, is getting exposed to a lot of people from different backgrounds, and that means a lot of different things. Just socioeconomic, racially, all these different things. And then I married. My wife is Latino, so that was she's Puerto Rican, so that was a whole learning experience for me, being the only white guy at a family gathering. And so it's a journey, and I think reading those kinds of books, whether or not you agree with them completely, helps provide additional perspective, because no matter where you are, I think it's very easy to end up in an echo chamber and be very like self-centric and not and just thinking about those things, even if you conclude that you don't agree with some points of it, is super helpful for understanding where people are coming from and being a more empathetic person.
Yeah, totally. And if you can, my view is if you can do so quantitatively, it just makes it so much easier to communicate across otherwise really hard boundaries, really, identity politics, and a lot of really, really difficult to overcome places.
Yeah.
If we're just talking about the numbers and the stats, well, those are what they are, and then we can decide what we want to do about it. That's a different question.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, that's a great recommendation. The other question I'd like to ask everyone is, if you could put like one thing on a billboard, one piece of advice for people, what would it be?
Nothing appropriate.
Fair enough.
No, I mean, really, if there was, I don't know that it's a slogan or anything, but if there was a message that, people could look at a billboard and somehow just feel that feeling, it would be like, just be nice to someone today.
Yeah.
It doesn't cost you anything to be nice to someone today.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. We get so, we get so sucked into our own little worlds, and we're these little self-contained ecosystems just bouncing off all these other people, and you have no idea what's going on in people's lives.
I like how that's literally true, by the way. We are our own little ecosystems.
Yeah. No, I think about that. Like, you're driving along and you get and someone cuts you off, right? They're in a hurry or they do something, and you're like, what the heck is wrong with you? But maybe a family member just died, or their wife is having their baby, or like there's so many circumstances where,
you never know.
Because I've done things like that and I felt totally justified in the moment, or it was just a complete accident because I was distracted for a second and it wasn't intentional, so it's just so easy to get so self-righteous about things. But so that's great advice. Just be nice to someone today. Put some positivity out in the world.
My point is just that it doesn't cost you anything.
Yeah,
right. Like,
that's
what's
true.
The downside?
That's absolutely true. And there's only upside to it. Well, Jeff, I've really enjoyed our conversation. I always want to give people a chance to plug anything. Where if you want people to be able to find you online, or what would you like to put out there?
Please drop my LinkedIn in the chat, or
it'll be in the video
chat,
description.
The description. There we go. Gosh, I almost know terms. And that'll be the easiest way to connect to me one-to-one. And I am basically the main point of contact for any move. So if someone does actually want a project directly looked at, it'll be me that they deal with the whole time. That's cool. One of the upsides I can offer.
Yeah, if you need to move anything at all, all right? Talk to Jeff.
Yeah, my business
literally anything.
My elevator pitch literally now is exactly that. I move anything or anyone anywhere in the world, and I'm not messing with you.
Yeah, that's great. No, that's perfect. You can find, please, like and subscribe this podcast. You can find, follow it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all the places. You can find me at flywheelconsulting.co or on LinkedIn, and we'll see y'all next time. Thank you.
Thanks again, Jonathan. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely.